For years, Princess Diana's most private thoughts were believed to have vanished into history, sealed away from the people who might have feared them most. Then, inside a restricted royal archive, one catalogued box changed everything. A diary marked for permanent private custody appeared alongside correspondence, linking its disappearance to Meghan, and within minutes, what began as an archival review became a family crisis no one inside the palace could contain. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The discovery landed like a private earthquake. During a scheduled review of Diana's restricted material, archivists found that a diary believed missing had been kept outside its approved collection, while custody records in this dramatized account showed Meghan had retained access before it was returned. The Royal Archive, a protected collection of family papers kept separate from state records, preserves sensitive material whose importance is emotional rather than constitutional. That distinction now mattered. William received the inventory entry behind closed doors and read it twice. He lowered the page, kept his voice painfully steady, and asked, "How long was it gone?" The prince needed no explanation for why the answer mattered. These were not political papers. They were his mother's private thoughts, written without any expectation that relatives or strangers would handle them freely. The silence became heavier than anger. Harry learned the same details separately, and the shock hit differently. He understood that the diary was no longer an archival problem. Someone close to him may have handled words his mother never meant to circulate. The file carried one chilling restriction: not for publication, quotation, or circulation beyond named custodians. A custodian means someone formally trusted to protect private material. That line made the diary forbidden, not because of legend, but because access had been deliberately limited. Then the timeline broke open. An archivist comparing dates noticed several weeks missing from the custody trail. The diary had not merely left and returned. For part of its journey, nobody could prove where it had been kept, who had seen it, or whether anything had been copied. Charles entered after the briefing and remained standing. The king took the recovery photograph, studied Diana's handwriting beneath the archive ribbon, then placed the image face down without speaking. Seconds later, William received another blow. Harry may have known the diary existed outside the archive long before its recovery. The discovery was explosive, but the deeper wound was only beginning to open. Because this was no longer a question of where Diana's diary had been. It was a question of who knew, who remained silent, and why. The palace could catalog the diary, photograph its cover, and reconstruct its movements, but it could not catalog grief. For William and Harry, Diana was not an archive category or a historical figure. She was their mother, and the moment her private diary became part of a dispute involving Meghan, every old fracture between the brothers returned with terrifying force. Because both men now feared that something sacred had crossed a boundary neither had ever agreed could be crossed. William stood near the window with the recovery report clenched in one hand. The prince, as heir to the throne and the royal figure most closely tied to the monarchy's future, viewed Diana's private papers as a family responsibility that had to be protected from exploitation. That mattered because any careless release could turn a mother's private pain into public property. Yet his anger toward Meghan was fighting something worse. The possibility that Harry had known about the diary and deliberately kept him outside the truth. Harry felt the same wound from the opposite direction. He had spent years resisting what he believed was palace control over Diana's memory, but that resistance never meant he wanted her most intimate words exposed. When Meghan sat opposite him and explained that preservation, not publication, had driven her actions in this dramatized account, he listened without interrupting. She reached toward him when her voice broke. He did not immediately take her hand. The silence finally forced the truth forward. Harry admitted during that private conversation that he had once heard about a personal notebook connected to Diana existing outside the primary archive. The primary archive meant the officially controlled collection where sensitive family papers were stored and tracked. He insisted he thought the notebook contained copied passages, not the original diary itself. Meghan watched him carefully, knowing the distinction might explain his silence, but could not erase it. Meghan then gave him the detail that changed everything. She said an intermediary, someone acting between two parties without formally representing either, had delivered the diary and claimed Diana wanted certain writings protected from palace editing. Harry immediately asked who that person was. She refused to give the name yet, saying the intermediary feared retaliation and had demanded secrecy. Harry leaned forward and asked the question neither of them could avoid. "Did you ever open it?" Meghan paused, then answered yes. He looked away. Possession could still be explained as temporary protection. Reading his mother's private words made the breach painfully personal. Meghan insisted there had been a reason she refused to return the diary immediately. That reason, she said, began during one specific evening when a conversation about Diana's legacy convinced her the book was in danger. To understand why Meghan believed she had to keep it hidden, the story has to return to the night when an ordinary family discussion became the point of no return. Every royal rupture has a moment that looks harmless until history turns around and points directly back at it. In this fictional story, that moment came during a private Windsor gathering years earlier, when a conversation about Diana's legacy shifted from remembrance to control. Meghan heard one sentence that unsettled her. Harry noticed the change in her expression. And within 48 hours, a diary almost nobody knew still existed began moving beyond palace custody. Meghan had already grown uneasy about how Diana's private material might eventually be handled. Discussions had begun over organizing personal papers for future historians, while balancing family privacy, reputation, and preservation. A private royal collection simply meant sensitive family records kept away from ordinary public access. Harry understood why that mattered. To him, his mother's story had been interpreted by institutions for years, and he feared that protecting her legacy could easily become controlling it. The dinner changed everything. A senior courtier discussing Diana's unpublished writings said some material should remain inaccessible until the next generation can view them without emotion. Meghan stopped speaking. She heard caution, but she also heard something darker, a willingness to keep difficult words buried until the people most affected by them were no longer able to challenge the decision. Harry noticed her expression immediately, yet he said nothing while the conversation moved on. Meghan confronted him afterward. She told Harry that Diana's words were being treated like dangerous evidence instead of a mother's private testimony. He warned her not to become involved. His concern was simple and painful. Acting outside palace channels could create the very scandal they both feared, and could turn Diana's privacy into another battlefield. Meghan argued that silence could become its own form of participation. He asked her to leave the matter alone. Mourning made the fear worse. Harry found Meghan exhausted after barely sleeping, and she repeated the courtier's phrase almost word for word. He told her again that she could not decide alone what should happen to his mother's papers. She agreed, but the warning had already taken root. Then the secret arrived. Later that week, an intermediary linked to a former member of Diana's household approached Meghan privately and described a diary that had never been fully incorporated into the official family collection. The intermediary claimed its most sensitive passages could disappear if returned through ordinary channels. Meghan accepted temporary custody. She told herself it would last only until she could determine whether the warning was genuine. Instead, temporary possession slowly became concealment. Meghan placed the diary inside a protective case, closed the clasp with both hands, and later told Harry only that she had been entrusted with something of Diana's. He pressed her for details. She refused to say it was the original. Years later, William would learn exactly what happened during those 48 hours, and when he finally stood opposite Meghan, procedure would no longer matter. The past had supplied Meghan with a justification, but justification would mean very little once William demanded the one answer she had spent years avoiding. There were no cameras, no public statement, and no ceremonial language to soften what happened next. William entered the private meeting carrying only a photocopy of the archive custody record. Meghan was already seated. Harry remained between them, physically and emotionally. Then the prince placed the page on the table and asked the question that stripped away every argument about preservation, loyalty, and history. Why did you keep our mother's diary from us? William had refused to let aides carry the conversation for him. The archive custody record, a written chain showing who was officially responsible for sensitive material and when, made the issue too personal for intermediaries. He wanted Meghan to explain directly why neither he nor the authorized custodians had been told. Harry stayed because the conflict involved both his wife and his mother, forcing him into an impossible position where defending one could sound like betraying the other. Meghan answered carefully. She told William she believed returning the diary immediately would place it back under the control of people determined to bury its most difficult passages. The prince did not raise his voice. He simply said she had no right to make that choice alone. Diana's privacy, he argued, was not something one person could claim ownership over simply because they feared what an institution might do. Harry finally intervened when William accused the concealment of turning his mother's memory into leverage. He insisted Meghan had never planned to publish the diary, sell it, or use it publicly. The future king looked directly at him and answered that secrecy itself could become control. By hiding the truth, she had decided who was allowed to know and who was not. William then asked the question that changed the atmosphere. Were any pages copied? Meghan hesitated. The silence lasted only seconds, but it felt much longer. She admitted in that private conversation that she had made limited handwritten notes, though she insisted no complete copy, photograph, or reproduction existed. Harry turned toward her immediately. He had not known. Meghan revealed something else before either brother could respond. She said the diary contained a passage describing an unnamed palace figure Diana had deeply distrusted, and fear surrounding that passage was the real reason she kept the book hidden. Harry pressed her to explain. She said the name was not written plainly, but the description was specific enough to frighten the person who had passed the diary to her. William pushed his chair backward and stood. He walked several steps, turned, and asked Harry whether he knew the pages had been read. The younger brother answered no. That single word changed the room. The confrontation had exposed the emotional wound, but emotion would not determine what happened next. Because behind locked archive doors, authority was already moving into position. By the time the family confrontation ended, the question had changed. The diary had been recovered. Meghan had acknowledged reading it. Harry had admitted he knew something connected to Diana had been entrusted to her, but not its true identity. Now the decision belonged to Charles. Yet when the king finally sat alone with the archive memorandum, he was not looking at a governance problem. He was looking at the private words of the woman whose death had changed his family. Charles read the memorandum twice and closed it. In this dramatized account, the restricted family archive protocol was the rule system deciding who could handle sensitive personal papers belonging to deceased royals. The diary was not a state record, meaning it carried no government authority. Its weight came from something more personal: custody, confidentiality, and the moral question of whether grief gave anyone the right to cross a private boundary. The king refused to open the diary. When the archivist asked whether he wanted to examine the sensitive passage, he answered no, and said Diana had written those words privately. Authority, he insisted, did not give him permission to invade them. William respected that choice, but pushed for every break in the custody chain to be documented. The prince believed accountability mattered, because without a complete record, the same violation could happen again. Harry feared something different. He worried that recovery would become permanent palace ownership of his mother's voice, replacing one secret with another kind of control. Charles listened, then told him protection was not possession. The monarch's answer was precise. Nobody, including himself, would be allowed private access simply because they carried Diana's blood or royal authority. Charles then signed the order. The diary would be sealed under dual authorization, meaning two designated custodians had to agree before anyone could examine it. No single family member could open the collection alone. He also directed that every copy, excerpt, handwritten note, and photograph connected to the diary be identified and either returned or destroyed under supervised conditions. The room fell quiet after the pen stopped moving. Charles removed his glasses, placed them beside the file, and said Diana should not have to fight another battle through us. William heard him, but gave no answer. Harry understood the ruling protected his mother, yet he also understood what came next. Meghan would now have to surrender not only the diary, but everything she had taken from it. And Harry had to decide whether protecting his wife meant resisting that demand or helping enforce it. Charles had drawn the boundary, but boundaries only matter when people accept them, and within hours, Meghan and Harry would discover how much the ruling demanded personally. The loudest moment was over. What followed was quieter and, for Meghan, far more painful. A sealed instruction arrived, requiring every note connected to Diana's diary to be surrendered. No public accusation accompanied it. No dramatic punishment was announced. Yet the meaning was unmistakable. The family no longer trusted private assurances. And as Meghan began gathering the material she had once convinced herself she was protecting, Harry watched the consequences of years of secrecy settle across their marriage. Meghan received the inventory instructions and read them without speaking. The formal inventory process meant every note, copied phrase, or personal extract had to be listed and surrendered under confidential supervision, so nothing remained outside the protected record. Harry was not formally accused of hiding the original because the custody trail showed she had handled the transfer herself. Even so, his partial knowledge left him trapped inside the damage, unable to claim complete innocence and unwilling to abandon her. Meghan opened a small notebook filled with observations she had written while reading Diana's words. She turned the pages slowly, then closed it with both hands. Those notes had once felt like protection against loss. Now they represented the choice that had shattered trust. Harry watched her struggle, then finally said he understood why she feared the diary might disappear. What he could not understand was why she had never trusted him enough to tell him exactly what she possessed. The inventory brought another shock. One page contained Meghan's reference to the unnamed palace figure Diana had feared, but the identifying clue stopped short of revealing who it was. Harry read the description and realized the mystery remained intact. The absence of a full name prevented any clean accusation, yet it also proved Meghan had reached the most sensitive part of the diary. William received a separate documented summary of the inventory and noticed something unexpected. Meghan had never photographed the crucial passage. No full image, scan, or reproduction had been found. That weakened the fear that she had been preparing to publish Diana's words. It also forced the prince to consider a more uncomfortable possibility. She may truly have believed she was protecting the diary, even while violating the family's trust to do it. Meghan finally pushed the last notebook across the table. Her fingers remained on the cover for one long moment before she released it. The archivist said nothing. Harry watched from across the room, knowing the surrender closed one chapter but opened another. That evening, Harry contacted William and asked for a private meeting. No aides, no Meghan, no palace officials. The diary had finally been surrendered, but one wound remained outside every archive box. Two brothers had spent years assuming the worst about each other, and now they would have to speak without anyone standing between them. For once, there was no advisor to choose the language, no spouse to soften a blow, and no institution to blame. William and Harry entered the room alone. The diary was somewhere else now, sealed and protected. Diana's words could no longer dominate the conversation. What remained were two sons forced to confront something far more uncomfortable. Each had spent years believing he alone understood how their mother's memory should be defended. Harry had asked for the meeting because he knew the dispute could destroy what remained between them. He wanted the diary separated from every older argument before resentment swallowed the conversation. William agreed, but only on one condition. Neither brother would begin by debating Meghan's motives. First, they would talk about Diana's privacy. That mattered because both men had spent years defending their mother in different ways, yet neither had ever agreed where protection ended and control began. Harry spoke first. He admitted he should have pushed Meghan harder when she told him she possessed something connected to Diana. His fear of palace control had made him too willing not to ask questions. He told William that distrust had become an excuse for silence, and silence had allowed the secret to grow. The younger brother did not defend that choice. He owned it. William answered with an admission of his own. The moment Meghan's name appeared in the archive trail, anger had taken over. He had assumed exploitation before hearing the full explanation. The prince still believed the concealment was wrong, but he now understood that fear and personal gain were not the same motive. That distinction did not erase the breach. It changed how he judged it. Harry then said what he had struggled to explain for days. He believed Meghan had made the wrong decision because she was afraid Diana's words would disappear, not because she wanted to profit from them. William listened without interrupting. He did not excuse her actions, but finally acknowledged that intention mattered when deciding what the betrayal meant. William then revealed something Harry did not know. Charles had refused to read the diary, and had ordered that neither son could access it privately. The king had chosen Diana's privacy over everybody's curiosity, including his own. That decision landed differently now. Their father had drawn a line neither brother had managed to draw for himself. Harry looked down for several seconds. Then maybe that is where we should have started. William did not reach across the room. He simply nodded. It was the first genuine agreement of the entire crisis. Inside that room, two brothers had finally lowered their defenses. But beyond the gates, the world had just learned enough of the story to explode. By sunrise, something that had existed only in locked rooms was everywhere. Diana's name dominated broadcasts. Meghan's role became the center of furious debate. Commentators argued over privacy, possession, grief, and loyalty, as though each could be reduced to a headline. Yet one image captured the moment more powerfully than any panel discussion. People gathering outside Kensington Palace, carrying flowers beneath photographs of Diana, while cameras broadcast the recovered diary story across the world. The palace responded, before speculation could completely take control. Its communications office issued a short fictional statement confirming that a private document connected to Diana had been recovered and secured, while refusing to disclose a single passage. Palace communications simply means the official team responsible for public statements and media responses on behalf of the royal household. Charles supported the wording because resolving the custody breach, in his view, could never become an excuse to expose the very privacy everyone claimed to defend. Meghan watched the coverage and understood how little motive mattered once secrecy became the headline. She had convinced herself she was protecting something vulnerable. Yet the public now saw concealment first and intention second. Harry remained beside her, but he would not pretend the decision had caused no damage. He told her quietly that fear might explain what she had done, but explanation could not erase the trust that had been broken. William reacted with a different kind of anger. Every broadcast repeated his mother's name, every debate pulled Diana back into public argument, and the prince saw the cruel irony immediately. A crisis supposedly centered on protecting her private words had once again turned her private life into spectacle. He switched off one interview halfway through and refused to listen as commentators speculated about passages they had never seen. Then, one front page captured the entire storm. A fictional morning edition carried a stark image of a sealed archival box beneath the headline, "Diana's Lost Words Return." By midday, visitors outside Kensington Palace had begun laying white roses near the gates. Kensington Palace, Diana's former London home, carried emotional weight because the public still associated it deeply with her life and memory. The story shifted again when a broadcaster stressed that the palace would release no diary sentence at all. Suddenly, debate moved from what Diana had written to whether history had any automatic right to private words, simply because the writer was famous. Charles watched the coverage in silence and muted the television. The king studied the flowers outside Diana's former home until the camera focused on one handwritten card. "Let her words remain hers." That sentence changed the final conversation. The public had demanded answers, but the most powerful answer would come through what the family chose not to reveal, and through the final decision each person was now forced to accept. In the end, the greatest revelation was not hidden inside Diana's diary. It was revealed by what happened around it. Meghan had made a secret decision she believed was protective, and discovered that good intentions cannot erase broken trust. William had allowed anger to shape his first judgment. Harry had avoided questions because the answers frightened him. Charles, facing perhaps the most tempting archive in royal history, ultimately decided that some words belong to the dead more than they belong to history. Charles signed the final sealing instruction without opening the diary. The king understood that a restricted private collection meant sensitive family material would remain protected from public release, while dual custodian rules required 2 authorized people to approve any future access. That mattered because no single relative, monarch, or official could claim Diana's private words as personal property. The diary would not be published, commercially exploited, or quietly examined by one person acting alone. Meghan surrendered every remaining unauthorized note from the period when she had kept the book. She acknowledged privately to Harry that believing she was protecting Diana could never justify excluding Diana's sons from a decision involving their mother. Her consequence was not dramatic exile. It was harder. Trust had been damaged, and she understood that explanations would not rebuild it. Only what she did afterward could begin that process. Harry accepted his own part without trying to escape it. He admitted to William that his refusal to ask harder questions had allowed the secret to survive. The prince answered that anger had pushed him toward judgment before understanding motive. Neither brother pretended years of division had suddenly disappeared, but both agreed on one principle: the palace could not own Diana's memory, and neither could they. The final moment carried no triumph. William and Harry stood together as the diary was placed inside its archival container. The security seal was pressed into position. Neither son asked to read one last sentence. Charles remained nearby, knowing his refusal to open the book had become the clearest statement of the entire crisis. What could have become the most sensational royal publication of a generation, instead became something deliberately protected. Diana's intimate thoughts remained hers. The verdict was painful but clear. Meghan's secrecy broke trust, even if fear, rather than profit, drove her. William's anger was understandable but incomplete. Harry's silence helped the problem grow. Charles finally created the boundary none of them had managed to establish alone. The archive door closes, the key turns, and the family walks away without Diana's private words in their hands. For once, the monarchy's final statement is not what it reveals, but what it chooses, permanently and deliberately, to protect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.